Many of my Saturdays unfolded in a similar manner. Rise around 9, prepare a leisurely breakfast, typically just coffee and a bagel, then spend an hour aimlessly scrolling through my phone. Occasionally, I would venture out, complete some tasks, and perhaps visit the gym if I was in the mood for a challenge. However, generally speaking, weekends served as my opportunity to rejuvenate after the demands of the work week. I held a typical position in an office environment. Neither dreadful nor thrilling, merely a means to cover expenses. My routine was straightforward. Rise, head to the office, return home, and perhaps catch a game if it's on. I wasn't the type of person who ventured out often. It wasn't a matter of desire, rather, the demands of work left me utterly exhausted. After 8 or 9 hours fixated on a screen, the last thing I craved was social interaction. Indeed, my life has been rather mundane. I didn't mind it, but I wouldn't be truthful if I claimed it didn't occasionally feel repetitive. So, when my phone rang that afternoon, I nearly ignored it altogether. Yet, I caught sight of the name, Harry. Harry, the young lad from the office. Harry was among the rare younger individuals I connected with. At just 18 years old, he had recently graduated from high school and started his journey with my company as an intern a few months prior. I was the one designated to guide him, to illuminate the intricacies of how everything functioned. Initially, I assumed he would be just another kid lacking seriousness, but he truly caught me off guard. He showed a strong desire to learn, posed numerous questions, and genuinely paid attention when I provided explanations. We found ourselves spending considerable time together at work, and gradually, we developed a strong connection. Outside of work, we weren't exactly close companions, but we did spend time together occasionally. Picked up some food after work, enjoyed a football game, and engaged in casual conversation about various topics. He was a great kid, laid back, had a fantastic sense of humor, and was far more responsible than I ever was at his age. I responded to the call. "Hello, are you occupied at the moment?" "Not quite." "Hello there. Could you do me a favor?" he inquired. "I need to find a way to get my mom a ride since I'm unable to drive. Do you think you could give her a ride to her destination?" Charlotte, the mother who defied the typical image of motherhood. I had encountered Charlotte on a few occasions prior. She was breathtaking. The type of woman who captures your attention the moment she enters a room. At 43, she had an appearance that suggested she was in her late 30s, perhaps even younger. She moved with a serene assurance, impeccably styled, never going overboard. As far as I knew, she was divorced and not currently involved with anyone. Harry rarely spoke of his father, and I never inquired, but from what I understood, Charlotte had essentially brought him up alone, toiling diligently to provide him with a good life. She consistently displayed a courteous demeanor whenever our paths crossed, yet our interactions remained limited to mere pleasantries. Just the usual, greetings and inquiries about your well-being. "I'm well, thank you. How about yourself?" Such matters. When Harry requested that I drive her somewhere, I found myself somewhat taken aback. "She prefers not to take a taxi?" I inquired. "Nah, she just leans towards someone familiar," he remarked, as if he were uncertain of the rationale himself. I paused for a moment, not out of reluctance, but because it seemed unfamiliar. It was Saturday, a day free of obligations, and it wasn't as if I was being asked to undertake anything outrageous. "Absolutely," I replied. "Where is she?" He provided me with her address, expressed his gratitude, and we ended the call. The journey that took an unexpected turn. At precisely 7 o'clock, I arrived at the location Harry had provided. I anticipated Charlotte would emerge in something laid back, perhaps jeans and a cozy sweater, something easygoing. However, upon her stepping outside, I found myself doing a double take. She appeared stunning, adorned in a black dress that hugged her figure flawlessly, with heels that elongated her legs, and her hair cascading in loose, elegant waves. It almost seems like she's preparing for a romantic evening, doesn't it? I swiftly exited the vehicle. I wasn't the kind of person to just sit back and watch while someone made their way in, particularly not when they appeared like that. Wow, I mentioned earlier, almost unable to hold back, you look absolutely stunning. Her smile revealed a clear sense of amusement. How kind of you to express that, Mason. I opened the passenger door for her, and she glided in with a poise that unmistakably suggested she was accustomed to capturing attention. Once I resumed my place behind the wheel, I inquired, so where to next? She provided me with an address, and I began my journey behind the wheel. In the initial moments, the vehicle remained quiet, save for the soft purr of the engine. I hesitated, unsure if she wanted to engage in conversation, so I focused on the road, anticipating her to break the silence first. As I eased my pace approaching her destination, she finally spoke up. Honestly, I'm not quite ready to leave just yet. I cast a fleeting look in her direction. No, you don't. She gave a slight shake of her head. Would you be willing to take a drive for a little while? After a brief pause, I simply shrugged it off. Of course. Is there a specific location you're thinking of? She paused for a moment, contemplating. How about we make a quick stop at a gas station? I desire a hot dog. I blinked. Is that a hot dog I see? She nodded, her expression unwavering. Indeed, there's an issue with that. I chuckled softly, shaking my head in disbelief. Absolutely no issue whatsoever. Instead of taking her to her destination, I found myself at a gas station, uncertainty swirling around me. She stepped out, purchased 2 hot dogs, offered me one, and then returned to the car. And just like that, my ordinary Saturday transformed into an unexpected adventure. I remained seated, grappling with the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in my mind. Only half an hour ago, I believed I was merely doing a small kindness for Harry, picking up his mother, dropping her off, and perhaps sharing a few courteous remarks. There I was, perched in my car alongside Charlotte, indulging in gas station hot dogs as if it were the most ordinary activity imaginable. And the strangest aspect? It genuinely felt like a usual experience. Charlotte savored a bite of her hot dog, releasing a soft, contented sigh. Wow, it feels like ages since I've experienced something like this. I let out a soft laugh. Absolutely, I have a strong appreciation for the culinary offerings found at gas stations. She wore a sly smile. Back in my younger days, indeed. In the days when I was free from the constant concern of maintaining a healthy diet. She savored another bite, then cast a glance in my direction. Harry mentioned that you put in a lot of effort. I simply shrugged. Indeed, my work occupies a lot of my time. What are your thoughts on it? That was a question I rarely encountered. Many individuals simply believed that having a job was the end of the story. You toiled, you earned your reward, and you continued on that path. But did I enjoy it? After a brief moment of contemplation, I replied, it's fine. Covers the expenses. She cast a glance that spoke volumes. That's not equivalent to enjoying it. I chuckled. No, I suppose it isn't. She reclined in her seat, idly toying with the paper wrapper of her hot dog. I once found myself in that position. Perpetually engaged, constantly occupied. I believed it was necessary. I believed that was simply the way life was meant to unfold. I cast a quick look in her direction. She gazed out the window, her mind adrift in contemplation. She had changed in a way that was unmistakable. More raw, more unrefined. For the first time, she appeared different, not just as Harry's mother or the striking woman I had glimpsed on a few occasions. She appeared genuinely authentic. It must have been quite a challenge to raise Harry by yourself, I remarked. Her smile was gentle and warm. It was indeed. Yet, I would gladly embark on that journey once more if the need arose. I gave a slight nod. He's a fine young man. Indeed, he is, she concurred. She let out a soft sigh. Now that he has matured, I find myself at a loss for what to do with my life. That took me by surprise. Could you clarify what you mean? She gazed at me, her face a mask of mystery. For countless years, I dedicated myself to ensuring Harry's well-being. Ensuring we had sufficient funds. Ensuring I fulfilled my role as a nurturing parent. Now he's nearly grown, and for the first time I find myself with all this time and no clear idea of how to fill it. I found myself at a loss for words in response to that. I wasn't precisely the most qualified individual to offer guidance on life. For the past few years, I found myself merely going through the motions. After a brief pause, she released a soft chuckle. I apologize for unloading all of that on you. It's perfectly all right, I replied sincerely. I understand. Her gaze was filled with intrigue as she regarded me. Indeed. I gave a slight nod. While I may not have the experience of parenthood, I certainly understand the sensation of being trapped. To awaken and recognize that each day mirrors the one before it. She observed me intently for a brief moment. In that moment, rather than offering a reply, she simply smiled. Shall we take a drive? I arched an eyebrow. Where might that be? She gave a slight shrug. Everywhere. For just a fleeting moment, I paused. With a gentle shift, I engaged the car into drive and smoothly merged back onto the road. A journey without a purpose. We meandered down the road, without a clear destination guiding our journey. The streets lay still, the sky deepening into darkness as the city lights began to twinkle to life. Charlotte lowered the window, allowing the cool night air to sweep inside. This is lovely, she remarked. Indeed, I found myself in agreement, astonished that I truly felt that way. There was a period when our conversation ceased. The silence wasn't awkward, it was simply a comfortable pause. After a brief pause, she began to speak once more. Have you ever felt the urge to try something new? Something entirely unusual. I cast a fleeting look in her direction. What do you mean? She paused to reflect. I'm uncertain. Simply a bit of enjoyment. A sensation that ignites your spirit. I gave a sly smile. It's akin to indulging in gas station hot dogs. She chuckled softly. Perhaps slightly larger than that. I found myself captivated. Her tone carried a weight, as if those words had been held back for ages, finally released into the air. What does that mean for you? I inquired. She paused for a moment, then turned to me with a playful grin. I'm not certain at this moment, but I believe I want to explore the possibilities. I found myself at a loss for words, but just as I began to ponder it, she leaned in and cranked up the radio. A timeless rock melody drifted gently from the speakers, and she rhythmically tapped her fingers on her knee, softly humming the tune. After a lengthy period, I finally sensed that I was engaging with life rather than merely existing. Uncertainty loomed over the night, yet one truth stood clear in my mind. This Saturday held a significance beyond the ordinary. I continued to drive, allowing Charlotte to steer the dialogue. Her voice, her laughter, seemed to release a lifetime of tension in that very moment. And in some way, it brought a sense of satisfaction to be involved in that. Eventually, we found ourselves by the riverfront. I drove into a quaint parking area that offered a view of the water, one of those serene places where individuals retreat to find solitude and reflect. Charlotte reclined in her seat, letting out a soft sigh. There was a time when I would visit this place occasionally, in my younger days, prior to Harry, prior to everything that followed. I switched off the engine. The distant hum of the city mingled with the gentle rustling of the trees, creating a serene backdrop. I confessed that I don't believe I've ever set foot in this place before. She beamed with joy. You've been overlooking something significant. For a moment, silence enveloped us both. She gazed at the water, immersed in her reflections, and I simply allowed her to be. It seemed as though she was indifferent to a reply. It seemed as though she simply had to be present in that moment. Then she spoke once more, her voice gentler this time. You know, I have no regrets about any of it, she said. Nurturing Harry, putting in all those hours, ensuring we had shelter over us. I would gladly relive the experience. I nodded, despite her gaze being elsewhere. Your trust in me is appreciated. She released a soft, nearly amused sigh. However, if I'm being truthful, there is one thing I do regret. I shifted my gaze in her direction. What is that? At last, she turned her gaze toward me. For the first time, I noticed a distinct spark in her eyes. Something delicate. I wish I had allowed myself to embrace life more, she said. Playing it safe. Abstaining from action solely for the sake of my own joy. I was at a loss for words in response to that. I had never considered Charlotte in that light before. She never contemplated the life she led before becoming simply Harry's mom. As I sat there, a realization dawned on me. She was more than merely Harry's mother. She had dedicated so much time to prioritizing others that she had lost touch with the feeling of prioritizing her own needs. And now, for reasons unknown, she found herself here with me, attempting to alter that reality. I clear my throat. Indeed, the opportunity still remains. She offered me a faint, nearly melancholic smile. Do you genuinely believe that? Indeed. I spoke with sincerity. I certainly do. She glanced back at the water. Perhaps I ought to begin this evening. A surprising diversion. A short while later, she glanced at me, a mischievous glint dancing in her eyes. Understood. Share something with me, she said. When was the last time you engaged in an activity purely for enjoyment? There is no justification. There is no timetable. Is that really the reason? I needed to ponder that for a moment. I'm truly uncertain. Precisely, she remarked. You resemble me closely. Trapped in the monotony. I merely shrugged. I suppose. She inclined her head, observing me intently. It's time to make a shift. I arched an eyebrow. Ouch. She smiled broadly. Propel. I cast her a glance. Where is it? Is it significant? I chuckled. Well, somewhat. She shook her head in disbelief. Nope. Freedom reigns. There is no plan. Simply drive. I paused for just a moment. Then, before I could reason my way out of it, I shifted the car into drive and eased back onto the road. I was uncertain about our destination. I found myself questioning the reasons behind my agreement to this. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, being there with Charlotte seemed to be the most appropriate choice. We found ourselves on a winding route through the city, meandering past serene neighborhoods and deserted streets. She lowered the window, inviting the cool night air inside, and occasionally, she'd highlight something unexpected. A diner she once adored. A street that served as a backdrop for countless memories shared among her and her friends during their teenage years. At a certain moment, she chuckled and glanced in my direction. This night feels utterly unique, unlike any I've experienced before. What do you mean? She paused for a moment, contemplating. A time when I felt completely at ease. A moment where I was neither a mother nor a worker, just existing as myself. Only I found myself at a loss for words in response to that. Yet, I understood precisely what she was experiencing. The moment had transformed. Ultimately, we found ourselves at a vintage diner on the outskirts of town. A spot where neon signs flickered and booths boasted cracked leather seats. It appeared as though it had existed for an eternity. Charlotte cast me a playful glance. Starving. A sly smile crept across my face. We just indulged in some gas station hot dogs. She shrugged, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Okay, let's get started. We entered and settled into a cozy booth by the window. The venue was almost devoid of people. Only a few truckers stood at the counter, accompanied by an older waitress who seemed like she had been part of the establishment since its inception. Charlotte decided to indulge in a milkshake. I acquired a cup of coffee. For the next hour, we simply engaged in conversation. It's not concerning Harry. It's not about obligations. Merely a reflection on existence. She recounted the moment she nearly relocated to California but hesitated at the final hour. I shared with her a moment from my past when I contemplated leaving my job behind and starting fresh in an entirely different place, yet ultimately, I never took that leap. Laughter filled the air. We exchanged narratives. For the first time in ages, I truly felt immersed in a moment rather than merely going through the motions. At a certain moment, she cast her gaze in my direction and offered a smile. "Do you realize something?" she remarked. "Tonight feels like a refreshing return to youth for the first time in ages." The way she spoke, the intensity of her gaze, stirred something unusual within my chest. I averted my gaze, feigning a sip of my coffee. For the very first time, I came to a profound realization. This was more than just an enjoyable evening. This was not merely an ordinary drive. There was a shift occurring in our connection. I was completely at a loss regarding what actions to take next. We lingered in that diner, time stretching endlessly around us. Engaging in conversation. Chortling. Time slips away unnoticed. At a certain moment, Charlotte cast her eyes toward the clock mounted on the wall. The hour had long since crossed into the depths of night. She swirled the remnants of her milkshake with her straw, then gazed at me, her eyes holding an enigmatic expression. "Are you really ready to head home just yet?" she inquired. I paused for a brief moment. "No, not quite." Her smile held a subtle complexity, hinting at unspoken thoughts lingering just beneath the surface. She extended her hand to her purse, retrieved some cash, and placed it on the table to cover the bill. "Let's go," she said. We strolled back to my vehicle. The night air was imbued with a serene, crisp calmness that is rarely felt at any other time. Upon unlocking the door, she paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Then, with a nonchalant air, she remarked, "There's a spot not too distant from here. A quaint motel nestled at the outskirts of town." I glanced in her direction. She locked her gaze with mine, her expression unwavering. "Without a doubt. Trust your instincts." I gulped. "Are you interested in going there?" A subtle smile danced at the edge of her lips. "Just if you choose to." I took my time before responding. I gazed at her, attempting to decipher her thoughts, to understand what was unfolding in her mind, while perhaps also seeking clarity on my own feelings. With a silent agreement, I simply nodded. We returned to the vehicle. I turned the key, and I set off on the road. A serene spot on the fringes. The motel met all my expectations perfectly. A nostalgic roadside establishment, likely dating back to the 80s. A neon vacancy sign pulsed with life, its soft buzz cutting through the stillness of the night. The car was parked. Charlotte paused, her gaze fixed on the window, lost in thought. Then she faced me. "Let's go," she urged. We stepped inside. At the front desk, a weary clerk hardly lifted his gaze from the newspaper as Charlotte slid her card across the counter. "There are no inquiries. Let's skip the pleasantries. Only a key and a room number." As we strolled through the corridor, the atmosphere around us seemed to pulse with unspoken stories. As she turned the key and opened the door, we crossed the threshold into the unknown. Upon waking the next morning, I was greeted by the delightful melody of birds chirping just outside my window. The gentle illumination of dawn seeped through the delicate motel curtains, creating elongated silhouettes that danced across the space. For a moment, I found myself lost in uncertainty about my surroundings. Then everything returned. I rolled over, a reflexive action, yet the space beside me lay vacant. I propped myself up. Silence enveloped the room. Excessively silent. Charlotte had vanished. The space beside her was frigid, as if she had been absent for some time. Her handbag had vanished. A solitary indication of her presence lingered, a meticulously folded napkin resting on the nightstand. I extended my hand toward it. Only 4 words appeared, inscribed in delicate, meticulous script. "I appreciate your company this evening." That was the end. No elaboration needed. No number. There's no assurance of a conversation later. A simple farewell in silence. I lingered in that moment, fixated on the note, attempting to unravel the events of the previous night. The manner in which we conversed. The manner in which the dynamics between us had transformed. An unexpected turn for both of us. And then, in an instant, she vanished. I let out a breath, my hands gliding over my features. The heaviness of reality began to settle in. What on earth had I just done? The journey home. The journey home seemed otherworldly, as if I were returning from an unusual dreamscape. The city appeared unchanged. The streets felt like home. Yet, there was a shift within me, an elusive transformation that I couldn't quite identify. I arrived at my apartment complex, parked the car, and took a moment to sit there, my hands tightly holding the steering wheel. I was completely in the dark about what this meant, unsure of my next steps, and questioning whether I should ever mention it again. All I understood was that an event had transpired the previous night, and despite my efforts, I knew I wouldn't be able to erase it from my memory. It's curious how existence continues to unfold, regardless of the circumstances. 2 months had slipped by since that evening with Charlotte, and in many respects, life had returned to its usual rhythm. The routine remained unchanged, with mornings consumed by a flurry of emails, afternoons stretching on in a series of interminable meetings, and evenings winding down at home with a cold beer and a game flickering on the screen. I continued to see Harry at the office, continued to grab coffee with the guys, and continued to go through the motions of an ordinary life. And yet, there was an unmistakable shift, subtle and unassuming, not the kind that haunted my thoughts, but rather in those serene pauses between engagements, during the drive home, or when a familiar tune played softly on the radio. I find myself reflecting on that night, on her, not with yearning or remorse, but simply as a memory that holds significance. Without expectations, there are no regrets. Charlotte and I never discussed it, not due to any avoidance on our part. We were not. Neither of us was behaving oddly. We were simply ourselves, as usual. I spotted her once at the grocery store. She was selecting apples, her mind wandering far away. I nearly spoke up, but just as I was about to, she turned and caught sight of me. In that brief moment, I find myself contemplating her response. A furtive look? A smile that feels compelled? Perhaps a bit of clumsy conversation? Yet, she merely smiled broadly. Mason, she remarked, effortlessly tossing an apple between her hands. It's been a while since we last connected. And that was all there was to it. We engaged in a brief exchange, just casual dialogue. How is everything going with your projects? How is Harry faring? Is there anything fresh to share? She waved, mentioned she had to leave, and strolled away as if it were just another ordinary day. And in some way, that seemed fitting. That evening at the motel was no error. Neither of us felt any regret about it. It was merely a fleeting instant. An occurrence that took place at a time when we both required it. It provided us with a touch of clarity, a brief respite from our daily routines. Yet, it was never intended to alter the course of our lives. And we both grasped that concept. Harry remained blissfully unaware, and perhaps that was for the best. I occasionally spent time with Harry. He would swing by my place to catch a game, and afterward, we'd head out for a drink, just like always. He never brought up anything out of the ordinary regarding his mother. I never inquired about whether anything had occurred that evening. Perhaps he was completely unaware. Perhaps he simply lacked the desire to understand. In any case, I had no intention of mentioning it. There are certain matters that are best forgotten, and this is certainly one of them. Not due to any sense of shame, nor because it was inherently wrong, but simply because it required no embellishment beyond its own essence. The significance of that night. Life continued its relentless march onward. Time stretched on, transforming weeks into months. That night gradually slipped away, transforming into one of those memories that rarely crosses your mind, yet when it does, it evokes a subtle, understanding smile. Not due to its transformative nature. Not due to the fact that it marked the beginning of something greater. Yet, it was genuine. One solitary evening. One fleeting instant. Sometimes, individuals simply seek a way to break free. A pause from the usual demands. An opportunity to experience something unique, even if only for a brief moment. And then, once it concludes, they return to their everyday existence. Free of resentment. No sorrow. In that fleeting instant, it was precisely what they both sought. And that sufficed.